25 or so, I probably weighed about 138 pounds. I smoked like a pack of cigarettes a day. I drank tremendous amount of alcohol. I was from northern Alberta, this rough little town up in northern Alberta called Fairview, and there were long winters there, and my friends were heavy drinkers, and most of them dropped out of school by the time they were 15 or 16, went off to work on the oil rigs, and it was a rough town, and we drank a lot. I started when I was 14. My family, going back several generations, has been cursed with a particularly vicious form of depression, and so it's been quite a catastrophe. It really affected my grandfather for decades. He was immobilized, I would say, after the death of his father. It was really awful. And it hit my father when he was in his late 40s. There were signs of it before that, especially in the winter. And then it affected me, and it affected my daughter and a number of cousins, and it's really pervasive. And so it's nasty. I don't regret that. I had a fine time when I was a kid, but I needed really to get disciplined, and got to the point around 25 when I was in graduate school trying to get my PhD, doing all my research. I published 15 papers by the time I graduated with my PhD, which was by a fairly large measure the most papers that any graduate student at that time had ever published at McGill. I think that's right. It might have been twice as many, or maybe twice as many, maybe even 3 times as many. And at the same time I wrote Maps of Meaning, which was a terribly difficult thing to do, because I was writing about 3 hours a day doing that, and I couldn't do all that and continue with my misbehavior, my massive hedonistic consumption of alcohol and all of that. I just couldn't keep it up and also work seriously on the issues that were at hand. So if you're seriously depressed, maybe you'll watch a news article about something stupid and you'll think, Jesus, why should I even be alive? And I'm dead serious about that. If anything that happens to you that's negative will trigger suicidal thoughts, roughly speaking, and sometimes even positive things will do it, because there are very few positive things that happen that don't carry with them some threat of change or transformation. I plan on taking my own life very soon. Why shouldn't I? You have to think very carefully through the consequences of that for other people. So I've had clients in my clinical practice who never recovered from the suicide of a family member. Decades later, they're still torturing themselves about it. And so that's what you leave behind. Now, the problem is you might be dreaming about that, because maybe you're feeling that life has been twisted against you and that people deserve to suffer for the misery that they've imposed upon you. But I would say, think very, very carefully before you go down that route. You might think, well, those people would be better off without me. And if you get really depressed, you can think that way, and you can even get to the point where you can't think any other way than that. And I would say, if you're at the point where you can't think any other way than that, then you should tell someone and you should go to the hospital. Because that can happen, and it can happen if you get depressed. And there are treatments for depression, and many of them work. For some people, antidepressants work like mad. Now, they don't work for everyone, and I'm not claiming that they're a panacea. But they certainly beat the hell out of suicide. There's lots of reasons that people get depressed that are very, very complex. I would say don't give up hope and do something final before you've explored all possible options. A wise man that I once worked with said, he was a very strange person. He was a psychologist at the maximum security prison. And he said, you can always commit suicide tomorrow. And you can put it off. And so I would say just put it off. And then put it off some more, and then put it off some more, and see what you can do to put yourself together. If someone comes to me and they're depressed, so they're not sleeping properly, they feel terrible in the morning, they don't have a lot of energy, they're having a hard time experiencing any positive emotion, it's difficult for them to move, and they have a lot of negative thoughts about the past and the present and the future. I do an analysis of their life first to say, well, do you have a job that's all right, that at least isn't horrifying? Is it okay for you to go to work in the morning? Do you have an intimate relationship that's basically functional? Do you have some friends? Are your relationships with your family members okay? Are you reasonably healthy apart from the depression? And do you have useful and interesting things to do that aren't related to your career? And if the person says yes to all of those and they're still feeling terrible, then I think, okay, this person is depressed. And in my experience, those are the people who respond quite well to antidepressants. And there is evidence that one of the functions of antidepressants is anti-inflammatory, and that depression is an inflammatory condition, and that it's associated with autoimmune dysfunction. And so, who knows how prevalent that is? I mean, it's more prevalent than people thought 20 years ago. This science, independent of my opinion and my daughter's opinion, independent of that, there's evidence for autoimmune involvement in the pathophysiology. Our daughter ended her life at 24 due to depression. If someone is determined to end their life, how can one change their mind? Oh, well, first of all, I'm very sorry about that. That's a terrible thing. Sorry. There's been a lot of depression in our family, so it's a question that cuts close to the bone. Anyways, I had this friend, a friend of my parents, and her granddaughter committed suicide, you know. She was just beating herself up about that. What could have I done? What could have I done differently? This is the problem with suicide. It leaves everybody behind thinking, oh my God, what could have I done? I could have treated the person better. I could have listened. I could have been there. It's like, and she was just beating herself up about this, really feeling that she wasn't a useful person, that she'd failed as a grandmother. She's a really good person, you know. And I said, look, you're blaming yourself for your granddaughter's suicide. It's like, are you blaming your husband? Are you sitting him down and telling him what a useless bastard he was as a grandfather because his granddaughter committed suicide and how he failed completely? She said, no, I'd never do that. So I said, well, don't do it to yourself. People get depressed because they're really sick. We know that depression can be an inflammatory disease. It might be associated with autoimmune dysfunction. There's lots of reasons that people get depressed, and depressed people can go places that are so dark you just cannot imagine it. And it isn't necessarily the case that you can always rescue someone, you know. I think there are times when people are so depressed that there isn't anything that anyone can do. You know, and the depressed person thinks, and this is probably the worst part of it, everywhere I look it's nothing but catastrophe. And I can't see any way out of it. I can't see any path forward whatsoever. It isn't going to get any better. No matter where I turn, there's no escape. The suffering is unbearable. And I'm absolutely no use whatsoever to anyone. It would be better for everyone if I was just gone, because if I'm not so much of a burden now that it's going to destroy their life, then I'm going to be that much of a burden in the future. You can listen to people. You can desperately encourage them to seek the help they need. You know, like I've seen antidepressants work miracles on very, very many people. Now, they don't work for everyone, and they're not a panacea, but, you know, they have side effects and all of that. But one of the side effects of untreated depression is that you kill yourself, and there is no recovery from that. And the probability is actually rather high. It's worth having a war with someone if they're in dire straits and they won't do everything they can to get better. ECT works, electroconvulsive therapy works for intractable depression. It's a terrible thing to contemplate, but the modern versions of ECT aren't. One flew over the cuckoo's nest. And again, it's like, there's no coming back from death. You're a master at formulating your arguments. You win everything. And better than that, when you win everything, everyone around you wins too. Because to transform yourself into, let's consider your transformation to something approximating the logos. It means you shine a light on the whole world. Well, there's nothing more exciting to do than that. There's nothing better you can possibly do. When people share good news about their life, people don't necessarily respond positively. You know, they don't get encouragement. And people need so little encouragement. It's just unbelievable. And every single person who gets their act together a little bit has the capacity to spread that around them. It's a chain reaction, and so it's a lovely thing to see. You watch the people around you who thrive, regardless of what they say, they act out the proposition that everyone matters. If you ask yourself, instead of telling yourself, you know, what is it that I could do to set things more right today that I would actually do? It's usually some small thing because you're not that disciplined, you know. Then you can go do it. And then you put the world together a little more when you do that. And that spreads out. But you also construct yourself into something that's better able to call order forth from chaos. And that makes you just incrementally stronger. And then the next day, you can maybe take on a slightly larger task. And like, you get the benefit of compound interest if you do that. It's a tremendously powerful technique. And I think if you do that, at some point, instead of just having to fix things up that are not good, you'll start to get a glimmer of the positive things that you could do. So that means the more important the goal you pick, the more possibility there is for the kind of reward, let's say. It's really a state of being that is life-affirming. If you have a purpose, then it's analgesic. It takes some of the pain out of life. It's very positive in that it motivates and energizes you and focuses you and makes you able to remember and pay attention. And it quells fear.